Friends, first of all, thanks for joining at such a short notice. I'm really grateful for your attention. And see, we are living in pretty interesting times. And when I say interesting times, these are the times which perhaps nobody could be fully ready for. And this is something which was completely unprecedented, and suddenly we have been thrown as a global society into a kind of situation where we have to figure it out how to come out of this serious challenge. And the biggest concern here is that this pandemic is just beginning to unravel its effects, and at present we have seen only the first order impact of this particular pandemic, but this is a problem which is actually going to stay with us for quite long, at least for next 18 months, uh, when it is proposed that vaccine would be ready. So at least for next 18 months, what we have seen right now as 21 days shutdown might be repeated in multiple occasions in these 18 months. Because if you go into the history of Spanish flu that happened around exactly 100 years back. Spanish flu came into uh, basically two waves. First wave was the wave of a smaller duration, and it led to a lower rate of mortality. But after that, the second wave came out around 3 to 4 months back after the first wave, and it led to very high mortality rate. And the total number of people who died in this particular Spanish flu were around 50 to 100 million people. And some people say that up to 10% of the entire global population was eliminated. So, setting in that kind of a context, what kind of reactions that we have to this particular challenge? So that's where I realized that as far as first order effect is are concerned, they are already being handled. But let's think of second order and third order effects, and particularly third order effects of this global pandemic, which at present very few people can see. So in that sense, I'm proposing something called Indian data dollar, which is basically a proposition for second legal tender for India. And my basic proposition is based upon a logic that whenever bad times come, lack of imagination is the biggest crisis, because somehow we tend to believe that we have lost our way out of this kind of a crisis, and that lack of imagination is the biggest crisis. So that's where let me introduce what I'm going to discuss in today's session. And this session is broadly distributed in these topics. First, I'm going to discuss first order, then second order, and then third order effects of this global pandemic and responses to these effects. And then how we are completely unprepared for particularly third order effects. And in order to counter these third order effects, how proposition of Indian data dollar as second legal tender of India uh, would prepare us to handle that potential eventuality. And what is the methodology of token distribution of this new uh, uh, legal tender of India, and how this thing would be then distributed first as UBI. UBI means Universal Basic Income, and then the second part Telecom Sector Fund, and then as the third part Reserve Fund. How this token economics would actually work, and uh, then I will also explain what are the steps for launch of Indian data dollar and what are the mandatory precautions which are must. And still, after giving a detailed view of all the above things, there would still be questions which are yet not fully decided. And after that, there are four annexures, and those annexures are basically clarifications. And if you people don't feel enough satisfied with the main content of the slide deck, then you need to go to the annexures, and that's where a more clarity would be there. And then finally, all those people who have participated in this exercise, I'm basically acknowledging them. So let's move into our formal presentation. See, the fact here is that at present, something that is overwhelming us is the first order impact. And that can be explained in a sense that this coronavirus infection has spread across almost all the countries of the world. And the most debilitating side of this challenge is that infection and mortality rates both are galloping. For example, if you just see at global data, first infection rates were moving very fast, but in last 5 days mortality rate has actually moved very fast. In just last 5 days, deaths have jumped from just 8,000 to more than 35,000 just in 5 days. And the biggest problem is that governments are finding it very difficult to contain the exponential spread of virus, which is basically called R naught. If R naught is more than 1, it means the curve is ascending. If R naught is 1, it means curve is flattening, and if R naught is less than 1, then curve is going down. So the problem here is that in most of cases, leaving China and South Korea, in most of cases this curve is still ascending. And uh, not just that, whatever strategies governments have applied in terms of mitigation strategies or suppression strategies, the level of achievement is still very low. And suddenly, the entire healthcare infrastructure, what to talk of developing countries, even developed countries have found it very difficult to handle this kind of a pandemic, because in most of cases deaths are not because of coronavirus. Deaths are actually because of non-availability of quality health care, because the infrastructure is overburdened. And what are the reactions to these effects, first order effects? Of course, government is trying its best. It is increasing testing facilities, quarantine facilities, and the broader healthcare infrastructure like hospital beds, ventilators, masks. It is trying to increase all those all those things. Sorry. And not just that, it is also partnering with civil society, corporates, and even army in certain cases. But the most important thing that needs to be understood is that what is the net result of this reaction to first order effects. And that result is that it is basically minimizing the mortality rate. So whenever I'm going to conclude the reaction to first, second, and third order effects, you must focus on this result, because the result is actually far from optimal. It is only minimizing the damage, it is not eliminating the damage. So in that sense, we are in a deeply compromised situation, beginning from our first reaction to first order effects. So please keep this thing in mind, that whatever we do as a reaction to these first order and second and third order effects, the result is only minimization of damage, not the elimination of damage. So in that sense, you should keep a track of this particular result factor. Then, sorry, I think slide deck is just okay. Now, as far as the second order effects are concerned, a reaction to that by government is that uh, government is trying to do home delivery of food and medicine. Then essential services are being managed as efficiently as possible, and more and more public awareness around this pandemic is being raised, and law and order situation is being managed during particularly this 21-day shutdown. And government is also trying to keep its staff both accountable and accessible in that kind of a situation, because there are lots and lots of news that are coming that people from medical community are demanding bribes for emergency vans, for ventilators and all other kinds of facilities. So if even government is able to respond in its best possible manner, what is the net result? The net result is that whatever damage out of second order effects that is going to happen is that government would be able to minimize it. And minimization means that whatever hunger or disorder would unleash onto the society, government would be able to, or we as a society would be able to minimize it. Okay. And if I mention particularly the most important and most unseen part of the story, and that is third order effects of this global pandemic. And that's where my concern is maximum. Because if you see India, India has roughly, I'm not giving you accurate figure, but approximate figures are that India raises around 20 trillion rupees of tax and non-tax revenue every year, which means that uh, in this kind of a shutdown, both tax and non-tax revenues are going to see a drastic shortfall, which means government will be seriously underfunded to meet out the such emergency expenses. And not just that, stock markets have already crashed by around 30 to 35% in last 3 weeks. And following that, corporate bonds have also entered into a difficult and a dangerous territory. Few weeks back, HDFC bond was attracting a yield of around 6%, but because of this particular pandemic, suddenly the yield has gone to 9%, which means corporates will have to shell out more money to raise funds from the market, which might lead to a situation where they may have to suffer from either a repayment crisis or some sort of a bankruptcy or insolvency kind of a situation. And what to talk of corporate bonds, even sovereign bonds of weaker economies can face a payment crisis, which can actually be a very seriously problematic situation, because in these kind of situations commodity markets can actually become very very volatile. And if you have seen recently some interesting things happening at the level of China or at the level of Russia, you might be seeing that those countries have started playing out certain games which are indicating that they want to move out of petrodollar. Because recently, if you have seen, oil prices have literally collapsed, and at present, the last time I checked, oil prices were around 26%, which means that if this thing, currency wars, start between major economies because of this movement out of petrodollar, then it can be very very difficult. And in that kind of a situation, there would be prolonged decoupling of Western and Eastern markets with respect to gold and commodities. Now, this is something which is very, very problematic, and this is also something which is invisible. And that's why I want to highlight your attention towards these third order effects, because when these third order effects will come, we won't know how to react. And uh, if I just try to show you what are the current reactions to these third order effects, you will find that these reactions are actually very immature. For example, central banks are currently on money printing spree, and they have just started lending and lending and lending. For example, Federal Reserve has started lending to the tune of $2 trillion. Suddenly, overnight, they have increased their balance sheet by a huge margin. It means literally throwing money. It is kind of a helicopter money. When too much money follows too less goods, this is only going to raise inflation. Of course, at present, central banks are aiming to kickstart the demand, and that's why they are issuing helicopter money. But the long term impact of this kind of a money is not going to be very good. And the second reaction, which is currently coming out in some policy papers and some notifications, particularly by China and USA, that they are going to launch something like digital dollar or digital yuan. So this is central bank digital currency. So they are trying to do it. But the problem here is that China or USA are very powerful countries, and they are in a good position to launch something like CBDC. But think of 193 countries. They are not in a very strong position to launch this kind of CBDC. And the most important thing is that in a global pandemic, instead of reacting against this eventuality in a global manner, every country is suddenly going protectionist. So everybody is closing borders, everybody is closing supply chains, and everybody is stopping exports, particularly of essential commodities and essential medicines and essential other kinds of critical infrastructure. So in that kind of a situation, the entire infrastructure of globalization will suffer a huge setback. And because of that, there is a very serious possibility of currency exchange rates undergoing a very serious volatility, and you must have seen that happening with particularly US dollar in recent days. And if currency exchange rates undergo volatility, then it means that volatility will be ultimately spread over to global prices. And the moment that happens, we are going to see something which can be literally equivalent to a monetary, economic, and social tsunami. So this is actually my concern. And at present, we have yet not seen it. But my understanding is that the way we are moving into this particular uh, challenge, and I don't think that shutdowns are going to stop pretty soon. And even if economy opens up, that will be not a full opening up, that will be a partial opening up. So we are in this challenge, in this crisis for quite long. So in that sense, the kind of monetary, economic, and social tsunami that will come would be something that we are totally unprepared. At present, people may feel that if they have food reserves or essentials commodities reserves of 1 or 2 months, they are safe. But the kind of challenges that are going to come up will be far more challenging in coming days, coming weeks, and coming months. And that's where I want to hit the nail. Okay. Now, the most important thing that we need to ask ourselves is that what is our level of preparation for potential tsunami of these third order effects? And the answer here is that since very few people can see and relate with these kind of effects, so that's why very few can actually control these effects. And the most important thing which is actually happening in the underlying structure is that if you ask what is the most important monetary consensus in the pre-Bitcoin world, which means in a world spread over last 100 years. So I would call that lender of the last resort consensus, which means that there is a sovereign authority in every country, in every sovereign country, which has the ultimate authority to ultimate power to issue money in that particular jurisdiction. So in that sense, uh, China is lender of last resort consensus. America is lender of last resort consensus. India, Japan, Euro, all are lender of last resort consensus. But the challenge here is that this lender of last resort consensus is getting stretched too far. And that's my concern. So if this consensus, which is the tectonic shift of global monetary stack, if that tectonic shift happens either at a national level or at a global level, then that would be something which will be very, very difficult for handling by particularly central banks and governments. So in that kind of a scenario, as a society, both as a national society and a global society, the challenge for us is to how to go beyond central banks and governments. And the most critical thing that we need to understand here is that money, the way it is functioning right now, is actually a loop system. First of all, central bank actually prints money, which is basically money as debt or money as credit, which is also called IOU. Okay, and this is supported by the other uh, part of this loop, which is basically treasury, where you pay all the taxes. So this loop is completed like this, and since you are paying taxes in legal tender, and government can keep on printing money, particularly with the help of central bank. So in this kind of way, this loop is the underlying methodology of lender of the last resort. But the problem here is that if tax collapse happens in a big way, it will lead to collapse of monetary worth of that particular currency. Now, in that kind of a situation, whatever should be done is something that this entire session, this entire proposal is aimed at. What I'm proposing here is that let's shift from tax credit loop to a public utility based monetary unit, which is on blockchain or which is on a shared ledger framework. So in that sense, I'm proposing that let's tokenize the telecom sector totally. And the prime logic behind this is that if 20th century monetary system was based upon oil, because oil ran the economies of all the nations, why 21st century cannot be based on data, which is the new oil? For example, almost all of you are sitting at home, you're working from home, but why you are able to work from home? The simple reason is that you have data availability. And here I'm saying data as a broadband infrastructure. So since you have availability of data, you are able to run uh, your virtual economy. And in that kind of a system, the basic question is that if 20th century could have been based upon oil, reference to petrodollar, why 21st century cannot be based upon data? And that's why you also need to understand that earlier the model was based upon physical hardware, branch-based systems. But today, the most of large corporations, particularly who have emerged in a big way in last 2 decades, they are basically network platforms. So in that sense, network equity is far, far more important than monetary equity, particularly in a connected world. And that's where I'm proposing that let's move from a single point failure mechanism to a decentralized peer-to-peer and shared infrastructure. And that shared infrastructure will basically be an anti-fragile mechanism. So you may ask why I'm talking of tokenizing only the telecom sector, not the energy sector. See, first of all, this entire slide deck in terms of proposal is focused only on India. And in India, uh, as far as energy sector is concerned, production of electricity is actually distributed in among both private and public producers, and transmission and distribution is done by state bodies. So in that sense, a lot of energy sector is very seriously fragmented, and the number of players in energy sector is very, very huge. And second thing is that when you think of energy in Indian context, you think of a family, which means the bill, electricity bill would come under the name of single person. But if that family has five people, then the control of that money, if we provide it as some sort of a government support mechanism or minimum basic income, that the control of that money would be in the hands of the person who under whose name the bill is there, or under whose name the account number is there. So in that sense, there is a very serious possibility that female population of the society might be jeopardized in this kind of a progressive proposal. So that's why I realized that it's better not to start with Indian energy sector. I'm not saying that they that cannot be. I'm only saying that the first way of tokenization should start with telecom sector, because in India this is the second largest base of data users after China, and not only second largest, but it is also a growing user base. At present, the approximate figure of data users in India is around 700 million, or 70 crores, and this is growing. And the most interesting thing is that thanks to Geo, that we have cheapest data in our country. If you go to something like Switzerland, per GB data costs you around $20. And another interesting point here is that we have a very young population. The median age of our population is around 27, which means that data consumption of this particular population is only going to increase in next 20 years. So in that sense, I can fairly assume that in next 4 years, the user base would be around 1 billion data users. And this data consumption is a trend over which I can make an easy bet. I can say that in next 10 years, Indians would be using more and more of data. And if data is the new oil, then let's dollarize the data. And that's where I'm basically making some assumptions in terms of the token methodology. I'm assuming a median base of 1 billion Indian users in next 10 years. So this is median base. I'm not saying this is a perfect accurate figure. I'm assuming a median base, approximate. And I'm also assuming a median consumption of each user at 1 GB per day. And if I continue in that trend, the monthly consumption is 30 GB and annual consumption is 365 GB. And over 10 years, this comes down to 3650 GB per user. For a billion users, it comes down to 3.65 trillion gigabytes. Now that's what I want to tokenize. So let's tokenize this 3.6 trillion gigabytes of data at the fixed rate, which means at rupees 10. So what I'm saying is that let's create a stable coin for with a complete peg at ratio of 1 is to 10 to Indian rupee, and let's call it as a Indian data dollar, which means the second official legal tender of the country. And It virtually means in a monetary sense that I'm proposing that 36.5 trillion rupees of new money would be created over next 10 years. And don't forget that at present the total money in Indian uh, public, if I say cash, this is around 26 trillion. So what I'm proposing as Indian data dollar as new money over next 10 years will be more than this cash. So in that sense, you need to compare it with cash and upcoming new form of money. But don't forget that this money would be created over next 10 years, not instantly. And I'm proposing that this money should be divided into three categories. One is Universal Basic Income Fund, UBI fund. Second, 40% of that should be earmarked for telecom sector so that it can be transformed into a zero debt sector. And the third segment would be at the reserve fund, which would be slowly released over next 10 years. And what is the logic of this UBI fund as at 26%? See, what I'm simply proposing that 26% is basically a sort of tax which telecom players will pay to the government. GST is 18% and annualized gross revenue is 8%, which makes a public share of 26%. So that actually makes public money. So what I'm saying is that let's take that tax money which will be paid over a period of 10 years to the government by telecom players. Let's prepay it as advance payment to all the 1 billion data users as a new form of money. So in that sense, I'm saying that let's put that money into the pockets of Indian data users so that they can handle the core crisis of uh, purchasing power. Because at present, hundreds of millions of people have seen sudden loss of jobs. You are already seeing that happening with migrant labor and lots of other people also. So at present, if government prints money, then it might see some third order effects which it won't be able to handle. So instead of taking that route, let's create money through a different model, which is a model based upon a public utility token, because that's where we know that now we are creating a money which is backed by 1 billion data users of a country, because it is a shared network. And if a shared network is supported by a shared consumption system, a shared value system, then it is far more resilient than a government led system. So in that sense, I'm saying that let's anchorize the lender of last resort consensus into a public utility based token built upon a blockchain based system. So in that sense, I'm building an anchor. Don't forget that a couple of decades back, China had fixed the monetary peg of their currency with respect to USD, and I think that rate was around 1 is to 8, which means every manufacturer in China knew that whatever they are going to produce, a large chunk of that would be exported to America. And that's why they were very assured that there will be no volatility, and they were able to sell at a profit margin of as low as 2%. And that's why they were able to compete, not only compete, they were able to outcompete all the ASEAN countries and particularly large exporting countries like even India. So you can understand, you can fairly assimilate the serious long-term power of these fixed rate pegs in economy. And I'm trying to do the similar thing but in a completely new setup, and that setup is let's build two legal tenders and peg one legal tender with the other legal tender at a ratio of 1 is to 10. So this is the broad token economics model for universal basic income. And in that sense, if you try to explain it further, I'm saying that 26% will become 949 billion tokens, and it will become 9.4 trillion rupees, which means that amount of 949 will be paid to every data user over a period of 10 months. Every month 949 rupees. Now if you are a family of 4 persons, it means that if you compare it with that, you will get around this amount of money as a family every month for next 10 months, which means that this is something that is going to take care of your basic necessities of over next 10 months. And don't forget that if you print cash, cash has a velocity of around 5x monetary velocity, but digital money has a velocity of 8x. So which means if you multiply 9.49 into 8, which comes down to around 76 trillion rupees. And 76 trillion rupees means that we are talking of literally 1/3 of India's GDP, which means that if and most of economists have already said that our GDP is going to contract because shutdown means complete loss of value. And it means that if we are going to lose in fiat currency based GDP system, then we are going to gain from a digital token based system in this particular methodology. It means that whatever loss happens on one front will be compensated by gain on the other front. So in that sense, this is a new supply of new money which is being kicked into the economy by telecom players through their data users. So once that happens, RBI will not feel hard pressed to do money printing, and particularly that kind of money printing which is not backed by a sustainable tax revenue. And the second category, which is basically for telecom sector, I'm proposing that 40% of the token supply should be earmarked for telecom sectors. So basically what I'm saying that telecom sector at present means Airtel, Reliance Jio, Vodafone Idea, and BSNL plus MTNL. And I'm saying that let's build a formula, and I've also given the tentative example of that formula in the annexure, that let's give equal weights to data share, market revenue share, and user share, and based upon that formula distribute 40% tokens into these 4 players. And whatever the shareholders who are the basically owners of these companies, they will convert their equity into tokens and they will retire all the debt. So which means that this is a kind of a situation where all the equity, all the debt of telecom sector will be converted into tokens, which means that we are proposing telecom sector should become a zero debt sector. Now this is very, very important because the next step that I'm going to propose is the telecom sector should be converted into a simultaneous banking sector. All these telecom companies should be upgraded into independent banks with a new category of crypto banks, which means that if telecom sector has to play such a very serious role, then it has to be in a position to meet out its fiduciary duties. For that, it is very important that it transforms itself into a zero debt sector. So that's where I want to build not only a sustainable banking infrastructure for near future. I'm also proposing to build literally a anti-fragile system for near future. And uh, the third part is basically focused on the payment part, because the moment you issue fresh money to the data users, the challenge for them is to expend that money. So that's where I'm proposing that first of all, let's make one thing very clear, that all the telecom payments will be in this Indian data dollar. And then you can extend it to all retail stores of Reliance, petrol pumps of Reliance, then Airtel's Easy Day, Birla's more chain of stores, and almost all the 400,000 point of sale terminals working in India. And that won't be a very difficult thing, because uh, the way Paytm works on a QR code based model, or MobiQuick or PhonePe works on that model. Similarly, a token model payment can also work on that QR kind of a model. So adoption curve cannot be a very serious problem issue, because already 70 crore people know how to make online payments. So it will not be very difficult to help them adopt. Now, for example, somebody might say that people won't be able to understand public key and private key kind of a thing. I do understand that, but the issue here is that even coronavirus is a very, very difficult medical subject. But in last 2 or 3 weeks, almost every illiterate person on this earth knows what is coronavirus. So in that sense, if we raise public awareness about Indian data dollar and crypto wallet management, I think this will not be a very big challenge that people won't learn of it. And even if somebody doesn't understand in the beginning, since we are issuing money in 10 installments, so people might falter at first juncture, but they will learn eventually. And we'll have to upgrade money laws by introducing Indian data dollar as the second official legal tender of India. And 26% plus 40% to the telecom sector, that makes 66%, which means 34% of tokens are still left with us. And I'm proposing that don't release them in first 20 months, because we will take some time in the early phase to stabilize the system. So after first 20 months, let's start releasing these 34% tokens in 100 tranches, which means over a period of next 100 months, which means that it will come down to around 0.3% of the token supply releasing every month. So this will be a very, very nominal inflation rate. So this won't be a problem. Plus, TRI and NPCI will become the joint custodians of this fund, and from them people can actually buy these tokens, and we can also impose certain conditions that a single individual cannot buy more than 5,000 tokens. And another important thing that we need to do is that we must induct this token framework into Indian constitution as basic structure of money. Because if that is not done, then some unethical player in government or in political party system might take this for granted and start playing havoc with it. So in that sense, we need to provide constitutional security to this particular token framework. And I think this slide is wrongly misplaced here. This was supposed to be the third slide. Anyhow, this is what is happening in the second order effects. So I won't explain it right now. Stop. So basically, with this tokenization model, what I'm basically proposing. So the first important thing is that I'm saying that let's shift from politics-based lender of the last resort consensus to a anchor-based consensus, and that anchor should be a public utility. But that public utility should be flowing on a blockchain, which means we are shifting from a black box monetary issuance model to a blockchain based transparent monetary issuance. And not just monetary issuance, both distribution and payment system also will be on blockchain. And sorry. And I'm also introducing token-based payment systems via blockchains, because all the digital payments which are happening right now, they are not token-based. They are basically digital transactions which are dependent on centralized servers. So in that sense, the model that we are going to offer is actually something which has not happened right now, anytime in last 100 years. So this model is, let's shift from single to dual or double legal tender system. And here the most important thing that is happening, that we are proposing a certain kind of delinking from direct and indirect taxes for particularly this token, Indian data dollar. So here I'm proposing, instead of direct or indirect taxes in a regular sense, in legacy sense, I'm proposing a transaction tax. And this transaction tax can be 1%, 2%, 3%, or even zero. I don't know. So, for example, if we start using, if we start issuing this thing in a blockchain-based framework, then we can actually say that in the beginning, the transaction tax would be literally zero. But as we move on, let's say that after a million blocks, it will be one block. After 5 million blocks, it will be 2%, or after 10 million blocks, it would be 3%. So that kind of a proposal can be hard coded, and that's where I would request you people to give your feedback. And the most important infrastructure that would be required would be, we will have to build dozens of cryptocurrency exchanges like ZepPay, like WazirX, like UnoCoin, where you can actually exchange token into fiat and vice versa. Because this is a stable coin like Tether, like like USDT. So you will need some sort of an intermediary where this thing can be exchanged. So that kind of infrastructure is very important here. And I'm not saying that this system is replacing the existing system. I'm only saying that this blockchain based token distribution or token transfer system is only a kind of supplementing mechanism to the existing legacy digital systems. Okay, so they will keep on working. Paytm will keep on working. All banks will keep on working with their online payment systems. No disturbance to that. I'm only saying, let's deflect all the pressure of third order effects coming onto banking system from banks to a parallel blockchain based token system. So in that sense, this is a kind of strategy which can save our banks even, because I don't want that banks should collapse in this kind of a situation. Because if corporates start filing for bankruptcy, if they fall, banks would fall. If you have seen in last 2 days, Indus Inc. Bank share has fallen 15% in just 2 days, and banking stocks have fallen nearly 40% in last 3 weeks. So this is a very heartening and very emergency scenario for banking stocks. So I don't want that kind of a situation to aggravate further. Let's deflect that pressure from banking stocks to a token based model. Now, the challenge here is how to implement it. See, at present, I don't think that this particular model, if we don't think of it into a smart contract based framework, like Libra, if we don't think in those terms, then this model would be far more easier, because we should stick to a UTXO model, and something like multi-chain can be used to implement this. And I'm basically talking of a permissioned network. I'm not at all talking of a permissionless network. And we can start with 100 nodes. We might start with 200 nodes, but that's a technological choice where I would seek your recommendations. And current multi-chain framework can sorry, easily handle around 1000 transactions per second, which means 86.4 million transactions a day, and it means roughly around 3 billion transactions a month. And UPI is currently handling around 1.3 billion transactions a month. So in that sense, I personally feel that this blockchain based token transaction model will be fairly sustainable for at least next 5 years. And as blockchain capabilities are continuously evolving, so we can upgrade this protocol in coming times also. And for distribution, we will have to build a directory of whitelisted addresses, and that's where NPCI and UIDAI, Unique Identity Authority of India, their infrastructure would be very important, because uh, the moment you download a wallet, you will have to uh, authenticate your identity, because the money should go to only that person who authenticates his or her identity with a Aadhaar number. And uh, in that sense, anybody who goes through this process will start getting their share of universal basic income. And I'm proposing this thing as a one step only. I'm not saying that this should happen every time. This is only mandated for initial issuance of universal basic income. So once that is done, after that people can keep on using through an independent mechanism. So of course, millennials will be able to sign on early, and as time passes, this purse of 20%, 26% tokens will be exhausted over time. I don't know. I can't predict how much time it will take. It might take 10 months. It might take 2 years. It might take 5 years. But I personally feel that if we are able to uh, achieve a ratio of 90% release of tokens, or 90% availing of these tokens by majority of population, then it will actually create lots and lots of additional value in the economy. And so that's why I'm not putting any time limit to this release till it reaches 1 billion unique users. And now you may ask that a total population is 1.3 billion users, and here I'm talking of only 1 billion users. So basically I'm saying that this will be restricted only to the data users. I'm not talking of somebody who is 2 years old or 5 years old. I'm saying that let's move from higher age to lower age groups and start with only those people who are 14 plus. So once 14 plus people are exhausted, then only we need to move towards lower age groups. So in that sense, we should move ahead in terms of implementation this UBI. And the second necessary steps which should be taken in this entire thing is that first, legal tender laws must be upgraded. We need a regulatory body, a new regulatory body, and members can come from RBI, National Payment Corporation of India, TRAI, and telecom players. And this token distribution framework should be made part of our consolidated fund of India as basic structure. And a provision of tax transaction tax must be introduced into tax laws. So some sort of uh, tax laws modification needs to be done. And dozens of cryptocurrency exchanges where Indian data dollar can be exchanged with fiat and vice versa need to be built. And to begin with, yes, we have half a dozen cryptocurrency exchanges. Their infrastructure can be used. And of course, whitelisting process should ensure the should ensure the privacy of each user. So it should not happen that anybody knows your public key, that this key belongs to Mr. X or Miss Y. So that privacy factor must be taken care of. And in the beginning, if people can't handle it on their own, they can ask exchanges to become the custodian. So this can be an intervening mechanism so that people don't spend much time in learning about wallet management. They must just avail the money and start using it. So that's where exchanges can come as custodian players. Now, the issue here is that COVID-19 is a black swan event, and black swan event is something which by its definition doesn't follow a grammar. So if you try to respond this event in a set pre-decided grammar, then you will not be able to build a serious challenge, because we have to think out of the box. And that's why I'm saying that we have to do a radical monetary imagination. With only that, we will be able to stop the third order effects of this global pandemic. Because when Bitcoin was invented, most of people started saying that this is a decentralized money. If community starts believing in Bitcoin, then people would be able to build a global notion of money. And my concern here is that the most important thing here is the shared value. If 1 billion data users of India are standing behind Indian data dollar, then this is such a strong defensive mechanism that whatever happens during these kinds of third order effects of global pandemic, we will be able to withstand that kind of pressure. And of course, there are some questions, and I'm not saying multi-chain is the ideal platform. Apart from multi-chain, we can also use other technology platforms. You can use even Corda, but I was not very happy with Corda as a choice because Corda doesn't offer you a global state, which is a shared state, because Corda is based upon two journals consensus, not a Byzantine journals consensus. So in that sense, I'm not happy with Corda, though in terms of scalability, in terms of banking sector, or a broader availability of technology, Corda is equally reliable choice. And but that's an area where I would say that still I'm quite open to see different opinions. And this banking license of crypto banks is something where I'm yet not fully clear, because I don't want to propose it as something equivalent of fractional reserve banking, because fractional reserve banking, like the way commercial banks work in India right now, I don't want it to this license to be equivalent of that. I want it to be based on full reserve lending model. So this should equal should this should be more or less equal to the decentralized financial space that we have built in particularly Ethereum ecosystem. So I want it to become equivalent of that. So that's where I would seek your advice. And there are some more questions like what is the minimum number of validator nodes, and which exact agencies should become nodes, and who should become admin nodes, and who should be non-admin nodes. So these are the questions. And of course, there are some precautions. And first serious precaution is that we should make it mandatory that if telecom sector companies want to avail the zero debt status, to avail the if they want to avail the banking license, then they must fulfill two conditions. First is 26% UBA transfer, and second is that they should convert their entire equity and debt into tokens. So in that sense, they should be completely healthy, a zero debt status. And second thing is that uh, I don't want that anybody should be able to keep on printing money in the legacy system. So that's where amount of cash in the existing system must be pre-declared, which means not just cash, even the other forms of money supply figures like M1, where bank money is involved, M2, M3, all must be pre-declared, and time-stamped hash of these figures must be issued by all RBI institutions and banks. So second most important thing is that all big denomination currency notes like 2000 rupee note or 500 rupee note, that printing must be stopped. And if printing of money has to happen, then it should happen at a fixed inflation rate of 1%, and that should be only confined to lower denomination currency notes, where the highest figure should be up to 200 only, not at all more than that. So that will put a certain restraint on irresponsible money printing which has happened in last couple of decades. So that must stop. If that doesn't stop, then this currency peg can collapse anytime. And this entire token issuance must be with 100% transparency, which means the block explorer and network analytics must be available 24/7. So nobody should be able to play politics with that kind of serious data transparency, which means nodes should be transparent. uh, number of transactions should be transparent. Everybody can see those transactions per day, per minute, block heights, all those things should be transparent. And of course, constitutional protection must be given. If these precautions are not taken care of, then this proposal can be misused by any unethical player. So, uh, as far as the certain clarifications of some important concepts are there, so that's where I have added annexures. Annexure 1 is basically based upon the logic of 40% telecom sector reserve. Somebody can ask why a 40%, why not 30%, why not 50%? So there would be questions whether it is any figure. So I have taken a figure of 40%, assuming that fair value of telecom sector is very difficult to finalize. In bad scenarios, telecom sector can be as low as 4 to 5 trillion dollar of market cap, and in optimistic this can be as high as 7 to 8. But the basic challenge is how to calculate the uh, the highest value that would happen in next 10 years. Now that's something nobody knows, because if economy collapses, then telecom sector also collapses. So it is a question of safety and survival of not only the telecom sector itself, it is also a question of entire economy survival. So in that sense, it is almost impossible to find a true price, a true ratio, and that's where I have based this entire thing on a hypothesis that telecoms companies should be healthy and zero debt, and that's where I'm saying that let's assume that in next 10 years the total market cap of telecom sector would be 14.6 trillion. So that is a fair value which I'm assuming here. And I'm openly saying that this is not a perfect way, but the problem here is that in this kind of a scenario there is no perfect way. And this is a token distribution model for all the companies. And don't forget, I'm saying tentative. I'm not at all saying accurate. So these figures can be plus minus by even 10% or even 15%. But these are approximate figures. These are for understanding. These are not for actual distribution, because we need to define a particular date from on which these figures would be calculated. So that date is something that would be decided by a consensus. So this is yet not decided. And as far as the transaction tax logic is concerned, uh, I'm not finalizing it. It can be 1%, it can be 2%, or this is something that needs to be decided in a very very rational and in a very evolving strategy. And even if it is 1%, we can easily go up to 100 trillion transaction, 100 trillion worth of transaction, and which means 1 trillion rupees of tax. This is a huge amount, and if it is 3% transaction tax, it means 3 trillion tax. And don't forget, no income tax, no corporate tax, no GST is applicable here. So in that sense, anybody who is using IDD will be completely free of filing any kind of tax return, whether it is direct or indirect. So in that sense, millennials would simply love it, because they will be completely immunized from any kind of CAs or CA tax problems. So in that sense, I'm saying, sorry, that for millennials and for our upcoming generations, this would be a very, very lovable proposal, that they don't need to file a tax return. And as far as center and state share are concerned in terms of distribution of tax resources of IDD, I'm saying that 30% should go to center and 70% should go to states. Now, why this is so important? Because when this proposal is to be passed by parliament, and when this proposal is to be taken to the rest of India, states should feel that they are on a gaining side, they are not on a losing side. That's why 70% for states. And another thing is that if tomorrow this token is used by people outside India, by Pakistan, by Africans, by Latin Americans, then this will actually give us additional revenue where transactions are happening outside India's border, but still we are gaining out of it. This will be somewhat equivalent to what is happening in the case of dollar, because 50% of dollar is used by people outside USA. So here, if IDD is used by people outside India, then we will keep on getting this transaction tax revenue. And as far as defining the banking license is concerned, I'm proposing that minimum holding capital should be 10,000 crores, which means 10 billion tokens. And this is important to ensure seriousness of a player. And I'm also saying that there should be upper limit also, because it should not happen that somebody is able to monopolize this kind of a thing in terms of token supply. So I'm also saying that the maximum upper limit should be 100 billion tokens. And if you compare it with total of 3.65 trillion tokens, so this upper limit comes down to around 3%. So this is a very fair figure. So any banking player which starts with a holding capital of around 3% of total tokens and cannot raise it more than that, then it is somewhat a fair play where monopolization or oligopolization won't happen. And in terms of financial services which these crypto banks can launch, the first easy and straight service that they can launch is peer-to-peer lending platforms. If Geo has more than 300 million users, then they can become they can transform themselves into peer-to-peer lending platforms where a lender is offering loans, and Geo Reliance is taking a cut in that service. So people can come together as lenders and borrowers on those platforms. That's the first major service that they can plan. And in future, they can also shift from Indians to non-Indians also. So in that sense, by default, these banks can become global banks also, but that will need some sort of a definition. Second thing is consumer lending, and consumer lending is a huge segment in India. You have seen banks like IDFC, which are basically built on consumer lending services. Then the business loans for particularly for micro enterprises and small enterprises. So these are the areas where they can immediately start their operations. And if tomorrow public blockchain assets like Ethereum, Bitcoin, DAO thing are these are token regulated, then we can also start more services like custodian services, asset tokenization, and other DeFi services. So in that sense, there is a huge possibility. So this is what I wanted to share with you. Uh, uh, Now I would suggest you people to come here and share your responses. Friends, should I start from top down so that everybody gets time and there is no confusion? Should I start with Bhargav? Bhargav, over to you. Okay, Satya, go ahead. Okay, no issues, no issues, no issues. Let's move to next participant, Azmat, Azmatullah Muhammad, Azmat. Hi, Azmat. Yeah. See, the issue here is that this is telecom sector fund is a basically model for uh, transforming existing companies from a debt-laden model into a zero debt model. And this is for existing companies. This is nowhere aimed at stopping new companies. For example, tomorrow when everything is done, more companies can join this model, and that's where this banking license limit, if you see 10,000 crore as a minimum holding capital, because tomorrow all those companies who tend to venture into telecom sector, they will not just be telecom players, they will also be banking players. So in that sense, there is no stopping of new companies. But as far as 40% telecom sector fund is concerned, that will be applicable only to these four companies, because at present there is no fifth company in the ecosystem. See, that's why I'm saying that once this 40% is given to these four players, there is no new supply of tokens for anybody else. So it means any new player who wants to come into the system will have to maintain these conditions. Number one, that player will have to raise minimum of 10,000 crores, and second thing, that player will have to have a long have very deep investments into telecom sector. So that would require a zero debt status, and it would be very difficult for these players to fulfill those conditions. So I personally feel that that long-term viewpoint in terms of telecom sector is that only few companies like these four companies will survive in telecom sector, because the kind of investments that are needed in telecom sector are so huge that uh, most of companies are not able to make profit. So that's where I think it will be always less than half a dozen players. So the structure which is at present in the market, four major players, rather three major players and one minor player, this kind of a structure is going to remain at least for next 10 years. I don't see any major change. Azmat. Yeah, yeah. See, first of all, before sharing this particular document or white paper with government, I want to make it as a public document. So I want to open source this particular plan with blockchain community of India. And the way I'm sharing with you people, I have already shared it with 3 dozen other peoples. So my immediate target is to first make it as a public document, so that is all these data figures are shared with all people. So in that sense, I don't want to be the owner of this particular project. I just want to release this particular project as open source or under Creative Commons license. That's first thing. Second thing is that I want blockchain community to act as not just the implementation agency of this particular project, but also I also want blockchain community to act as the guardian of this particular project, because if this project is implemented in complete seriousness, because figures are very clear, 26% as UBI, 40% as a telecom sector fund, and rest of 34% in 100 equal installments after first 20 months. So in that sense, if this structure, if this token distribution framework is locked in the constitutional amendment proposal, that would be required, and if that is done, then I don't think any political party, whatever it may be, can play politics, because at present the kind of scenario where everybody is watching government, and if this thing comes up, and since telecom sector would be the biggest beneficiary of this kind of a shift, so and a crowdsourced project with the support of telecom sector can ensure a continuous responsible behavior on the part of our leaders. Yeah, see, no. See, the fact here is that let's not put it into uh, this kind of a category, because this is a way of creating new players who can take the attack, who can take the damage. So see, the reason here is that if we don't issue this kind of a model, and if we don't create new banks in this kind of a pandemic times, then there is a very serious challenge that after this pandemic ends in another 2 years, half of our banks would literally be dead, because we are already sitting on a pile of a huge debt. So I'm saying that this would be actually a savior. It will not be competition, it will be rather a savior. And India's market, 1.3 billion people is such a huge market, that in this market more than 100 banks can survive. And if you compare it with US market, US market is 33 crore people and they have more than 200 banks. Rather, they have so many banks that the banking sector is the biggest employment sector. So in that sense, this is just a way of liberalizing the banking sector. And I personally feel that uh, in near future, as more and more decentralized financial player keeps on emerging, so I feel that once that starts happening, we will not see a few dozen banks, we will see rather a few hundred banks. So Azmat, I will have to stop you with just three questions. I will move over to Gangi Reddy, who has been waiting. Over to Gangi Reddy. Okay. Hi, Gangi. Hi. Can you bring your mic closer, because you're not fully audible? Yeah. Yeah. Better. No. See, don't ignore the basic target. The target here is that all the existing telecom players should be converted into zero debt. This is in no way stopping new players from entering. But my assumption is that it will be very difficult for any new player to enter into a system where you have to be a zero debt company. It will be very, very difficult for a new player to be a zero debt and simultaneously offering comparable services. So I'm obviously saying that telecom players would get the first mover advantage of this particular second legal tender movement. See, yeah, Gangi, the issue here is that I'm for universal basic income, but I'm only for a fixed duration universal basic income. These are extraordinary times and where I feel that purchasing power crisis is the biggest crisis. So that can be solved at present not by economy, not by banks. The only way of solving it is to put money directly into pockets, and that is possible only if we create new money. And the best and the safest way of creating new money is tokenized model. That's first thing. Second thing is that as far as 10 years kind of a thing, I am saying that tokenization of assets, tokenization of services is going to be a model which is going to be far more prevalent in coming months and coming years. So in that sense, tokenization of data as a utility is only the first step. You will also see in coming years, you will see state governments tokenizing their energy services like kilowatt hour tokens. The way it is Indian data dollar, they might call it Indian kilowatt or hour token kind of a thing. So similarly, tomorrow railways can come up with a model where they can say that we are going to tokenize the entire travel potential. For example, if they say that 20 trillion kilometers are being traveled by Indians in a given year, let's tokenize it at a rate of 2 rupees per kilometer. So in that sense, tokenization is a journey which is only going to create endless new opportunities, and I'm at present offering only the first step. I'm not at all talking of second step, third step, and endless other steps. Land can be tokenized. There can be endless methods. So I'm not going into that kind of complexity of tokenization models. I'm only offering first step. Don't forget first step. Okay, thank you. Over to Bishal Goel. Azmat, can you mute? Yeah, Bishal. Bishal, are you there? Bishal Goel, are you there? Okay. Okay. So, hi Bhargav. See, the first roadblock is lack of public awareness around three things. First thing is that people don't understand the third order impact. So that's that's something which only few researchers can talk. Number one. Number two is that we don't understand money which is not debt. So in that sense, in monetary sense, we always think that only government will save us, but the fact is that uh, actual money is created by public, or public is the real sovereign authority. So that's the second major problem. And the third major problem is nobody understands blockchain at present in terms of a popular sense. And these are the three major challenges. And at present, the first challenge for me is to create a critical mass of people who can understand it. And that's where people like you, who are thoroughly trained people, who are trained 360 degree in blockchain ecosystem, they can very well understand it. And that's why this entire game plan has to be led by blockchain community. Nobody else can do it. That's why I'm trying to share this plan with as many blockchain students of mine as possible. So this is the first thing. Second thing is that as far as the implementation thing is concerned, and persuasion and communication thing is concerned, that's again something which only blockchain people can do it. And that's where I would like to move to those corporates who have already started doing something in blockchain sector. For example, Tech Mahindra, for example TCS, for example Infosys. Imagine the kind of opportunity it will create for corporates for blockchain services. This would be huge. But the issue here is that this has to be set into a certain context. So I personally feel that communication is the first huge challenge. But the most interesting and the most supportive thing in today's context is that suddenly most of us are very receptive to new ideas. For example, do you know, in my own family right now, we are doing daily one cooking experiment. You'll be surprised. My son has learned how to bake bread. So in that sense, if these are interesting times in a negative sense, these are also interesting times in a positive sense of the term. And I personally feel that at present the uh, receptivity towards new ideas is at its highest. Don't you agree, Bhargav? Of course, of course. See, no doubt about that. I am fairly aware of the uh, of magnitude of the task that would be required. I'm not at all denying that thing. So that's why my target is not to reach out to 100 people. My target is to reach out to millions of people. And that's why I need to begin somewhere. And that's where whatever you have seen right now is something which I have designed in just last 3 days. Tomorrow it will be released as a video, in a short video, long video, as a white paper, and more blockchain communities will have to participate on this. And that's where I would need support from all of you people. And in terms of operational strategies, we will have to talk to people from NPCI, TRI, RBI, and government. So this will need a massive effort, and that is something I know that this is there. But my first goal right now is to prepare this project proposal in a way that it is actually easily intelligible, number one. Number two, at least the macro structure of this project is completely clear. There are no chinks in this particular thing. So if if 100 people say to me that this is a right thing, this should be released in public, then I will release. And out of 36 people who have shared with their thoughts with me, 34 people are saying to me, yes, go ahead with releasing this paper in public domain. So this is first target. Once the first target is achieved, then we will move on to second target, and their strategies would be different. So of course, magnitude of task is way higher. I'm completely with you on that. uh Let me be very realistic. If we are able to do do something tangible in next 3 to 6 months in terms of reaching out to political community, or building a sandbox kind of a thing, or building some sort of a support in telecom players, if we are able to do something tangible in next 3 to 6 months, I think, because the third order effects of this particular pandemic are going to be visible in second half of this year. And as that starts happening, people will start getting panicky. Just assume a large bank like IndusInd collapses in next 4 months. Assume a situation where HDFC suddenly shows 15% NPA. Assume a scenario where SBI is its share is down 80%. Assume those kinds of scenario when panic levels will start reaching beyond unbearable proportions. And as that keeps on happening in legacy banking system, this kind of a proposal will start making more and more sense. So that's why I see these times as very interesting. So these times are very seriously times of creative destruction. If value is being destroyed in one zone, we have immense opportunity to create value in a completely new zone. So just give you example of Zoom itself. Zoom stock has skyrocketed in last 2 weeks. Today it is a $45 billion company. So could it have happened if Corona was not there? So in that sense, of course, Skype has gained. Other video platforms have gained, but the kind of value that has gone to Zoom is exemplary. So in that sense, if tomorrow telecom players get hold of this proposal, and they come together under the banner of try, and they say that we will implement this kind of a model, can you imagine the kind of resources, social resources, community resources, technological resources, the kind of resources that would be required? This would be simply massive. And the way we are doing things right now, our public spirit is at its highest. And I'm only going to see this public spirit to reach more crescendo. And that's going to happen in next 3 to 6 months. So that's my plan forward. Okay. Is Bishal Goel there, or should I move to? Yeah, Bishal, go ahead. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Great. Do you have any straight question? Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it. I have already answered. Let's move on to Lata. Lata, are you there? No issues. No issues. Uh, Satya has already. Venkat. Venkat, are you there? Hi. I'm great. I'm great. Yeah, yeah, I do understand that. Yeah, yeah. Okay, Vishwa. See, see, the fact here is, if you just go into the real nature of 21st century networked reality, you could not have said 10 years back that Facebook would tend to become some sort of a currency issuer the way they have done with Libra. So when you are a networked platform, then the potential of services that you can launch is immense. So a social networking player becoming a monetary authority, some sort of a global authority. So the fact here is that earlier e-commerce players were not uh, supposed as payment players, but today e-commerce players are also payment players. Amazon Pay, Paytm Mall, and all those things. So the fact here is that in networked reality, ultimately, it will be very difficult for governments to restrict platforms to do certain things and not do other things, because we are basically into a globalized domain, and it's only a matter of time when corporates will be far more important networks than government based networks. So let's ac- accept the fact that uh, uh, corporate networks or public value driven networks are far more important than government driven networks in the current scenario. And the kind of challenge that is happening right now, where government is fast losing its critical edge because things are moving more and more into those zones. For example, at present, the entire responsibility of maintaining the information and communication infrastructure falls on corporate sector, not on government sector. So in that sense, I feel that this is only a matter of time that this kind of um, um compartmentalization is going to be over. So it has to happen, and down the line, this kind of barriers are going to be obsolete. So in that sense, I'm just making one proposal where this barrier would be obsolete, at least for telecom and banking sector. So this is, for example, I could also think that why a telecom player, if it becomes a banking player, cannot launch an insurance product. So in that sense, it will be not just double services, it will be triple services under a simple platform. So just focus on platform nature of reality. So in platform nature of reality, you can not only launch one kind of business, you can launch dozens of kinds of business, and this is a reality which everybody will have to uh, accept sooner or later. Yeah, see, Vishwa, the issue here is that I have already talked to 3 dozen people in this particular regard, and now that 3 dozen has become literally four to five dozen after this particular session. So in that sense, I feel that not everybody is constrained in terms of times, because there are lots of government functionaries, particularly at National Payment Corporation of India and RBI, who are working from home and they do have sufficient time. So in that sense, there is a sufficient space where I can talk to lots and lots of people, and I am also going to talk with a few more important players, particularly at Telecom Regulatory Authority of India. So in that sense, the kind of support I want from you people is that please connect me with uh, those people who can become the carriers of this project, particularly people from politics, people from telecom sector, and people from uh, regulatory sector, particularly TRI and National Payment Corporation and RBI. So these are the three zones where I would ask you people to connect me with the right kind of people. Okay, anybody who wants to ask, I will wind up in next 5 to 10 minutes. So anybody who has question can unmute. Hi Sumit. Yeah, sorry Sumit, I missed you. Sorry. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I'm fairly um, receptive to this suggestion. Uh, to be honest, the real length of this proposal would be at least 50 to 60 slides. Let me be very honest. And as far as all those details are concerned, they would be they would require very serious elaboration, and that is not a single person job. See, let me open up certain areas where things need to be very specific and elaborate. First of all, this particular equity into token conversion model, where strategies need to be designed, and that's something which needs support from top regulators of India. So that's a completely separate job, which is something I'm not elucidating here. That's first major task. Second major task is uh, taxation angle, because transaction tax is a very new territory. What should become the ideal transaction tax rate? This is a very big question. In the morning, I was talking to a tax expert, and he said that if somebody wants to take payment in Indian data dollar, then what will be the status of GST? Because if you are saying that only transaction tax is applicable, then this will need a very massive approval from top parliament, which means, for example, there are certain clauses where GST is not applicable. For example, for all exports, GST is not applicable. But for that, every exporter has to take apply to GST for input tax credit. So which means your 18% is paid back to you once you file the return. This is first category. Second category is in SEZ businesses, special economic zones. GST is not applicable. But first, that GST is counted for, and then it is paid back by GST authority to that SEZ player. So in that sense, how in case of GST this methodology would work for IDD is something that would need a very serious conglomeration of experts. So friends, uh, I know that I'm basically proposing a reset of monetary system of India. I know that it will need support and work at multiple levels. So equity into conversion is one challenge. It will need equivalent of separate white paper on that thing only. Then taxation, again a very comprehensive document. Then on the technology side, for example, how the whitelisting would happen. This would also need a deep dive kind of a thing. So if I see in a broader sense, I will need at least 4 to 5 deep dive documents, and that will also require very serious support from you people and top experts of other lives. See, this is a convergence zone where blockchain is going to offer interesting and life-saving solutions for legacy players. But that's an interface where lots and lots of blockchain leaders have to emerge. To be honest, I personally feel that this is a zone where almost all of my students have the opportunity to become great thought leaders and practice leaders. So in that sense, this will require a massive job. Even if Parliament approves that, it will be this entire job will take at least 2 to 3 years for stabilization. And that's where blockchain thought leaders, blockchain practice leaders will show their true competence. So this is a massive job. I don't deny that. Over to you, Sumit. Hmm. No, no. See, the issue here is that we are asking them to become to transform themselves into a platform, a blockchain-based platform. And if they if they transform themselves into that platform, only they will get banking license. Banking license cannot be given if they don't become debt free. So this is a kind of condition that is hard coded into this constitutional proposal. And because if see at the end of the day, what is debt? Debt is a way of increasing your liability, and as your liabilities increase, you will not be able to fulfill your fiduciary responsibility. And even if you see current commercial banks, both private and public sector banks, they are sitting on a huge pile of toxic debt, and that's the major reason of them flopping. Why Facebook was capable of offering something like Libra at a global level? Because Facebook is a zero debt company. Software companies and most of software companies have zero debt. Have you ever heard of Infosys sitting at a pile of 100 trillion rupees of debt? Have you ever heard of this kind of a thing? So in that sense, we need to accept that software is going to eat the world in the truest sense of the term right now, because software technology firms are, or platform technology terms firms are by default zero debt, and we are moving into the world of zero debt solutions because all blockchain platforms are zero debt platforms. Bitcoin is zero debt. Ethereum is zero debt, because now we are shifting from a top-down lending proposals, a lending mechanism to a shared value architecture. So this, in that sense, this is a civilizational shift. And that's, I know that's a very, very big shift, but I'm only saying that the time has come. If this pandemic had not come, then this proposal might have been delayed by more than 5 more years, even 10 more years. Nobody would have bothered to take into consideration, because then obstruction and hurdles would be so high that nobody would give it a chance. But these are the extraordinary times, and that's why I'm moving at such a fast pace. Sumit. Okay. Yeah. Azmat, over to you. Just one last question, okay? Azmat, just one last question. Yeah. 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 See, Azmat, I'm fairly aware of that challenge, and to be honest, if we go by Supreme Court notification that has come about around AGR dues, this is basically a death knell for telecom sector, and every government today understands that if telecom sector is killed, economy is killed. That's a very obvious choice. And that's why I feel that currently we will have to take out telecom sector from its current mess into a completely new kind of thing. See, uh, at present, whatever I'm proposing here is actually a very, very big imagination. Very big imagination. And at present, telecom players cannot even think of these kind of miracles. And for them, this proposal is a miracle come true. And that's why I want you people to connect this thinking with telecom players, because once they realize that community is asking for this kind of a thing, then they would be really happy. Imagine tomorrow Airtel comes behind us and they say, okay, you build a comprehensive proposal, you build a large team with its different verticals, and let's make it a reality. Then that would be a very, very different kind of a situation. So I'm fairly optimistic that in next 3 to 6 months, if we are able to take this proposal to a targeted segment, which I have already hinted at, if we are able to do that, then I think miracles can happen. To be honest, let me be very, very clear that this is a 21st century reset button for India, which has happened after 20 years of 21st century coming into existence. So this is a reset button, and this reset button is a civilizational opportunity. Let's grab it. If we don't grab it, then we are going to be doomed civilization. So this is a once in a millennium kind of opportunity. So if we don't grab it, we are a lost generation. Please go ahead. Please go ahead. I will be very honored. Okay. And last question by Gangi Reddy. Last question. Gangi Reddy, you are still ignoring the fact that their equity will be converted into tokens. And when that conversion happens, see, just try to look at the figures. At present, uh, I don't know what is the true market cap, but I'm evaluating the entire telecom sector at a 14.6 trillion rupees, which means uh, a company like Idea, Vodafone Idea, will get at least three times valuation with a zero debt status. Can you imagine the kind of fresh capital that they would be having in their hands? Can you imagine? And that capital can be easily converted into a new holding company. Okay. Okay, friends. It is really very great to hear back from you people, and I think now you people can realize that the kind of teaching, that kind of learning that you have received in last 1 year or so, the time of making that learning into a great practice and great opportunity has come. So this context is only going to become more and more potent in coming days and weeks. So let's keep on connecting on these things again and again. So let's keep in touch, and thank you again for coming to this particular session at such a short notice, and my exclusive thanks to Sumit and Bhargav for arranging this, and I'm really thankful. And let's keep on connecting on all the issues which I have highlighted in this particular session, and let's get back. Thank you everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you.